My beloved child, stop scrolling and remain here for a moment, because what you are about to hear was not placed before you by accident. Something happened behind closed doors, beneath trembling lights, in a room filled with flowers, promises, and people who believed they were about to witness a beginning. But heaven saw something else. Heaven saw a heart standing at the edge of a decision it could no longer survive. And before the final promise could be spoken, your soulmate heard one emotional confession that changed the direction of everything. Do not look away yet. The part that will surprise you is not that they walked away from their own wedding. The deeper truth is why they did it, whose words reached them, and why your name had already been living silently inside that moment long before anyone entered the room. Something huge is waiting for you in this message, but it must be revealed carefully, because the truth did not arrive all at once. It came like a quiet sound through a crowded place, small enough for others to ignore, but powerful enough to make one soul finally stop pretending. For a long time, your soulmate had been trying to convince themselves that moving forward meant moving away from you. They told themselves that time would erase what they felt. They repeated practical reasons in their mind. They listened to the advice of people who believed love should be simple, predictable, and easy to explain. They allowed the voices around them to become louder than the truth within them. But the soul does not forget what the mind tries to bury. The heart may become quiet, yet silence is not the same as absence. They had carried you into every room without admitting it. They had compared every conversation to the way you once listened. They had noticed the emptiness hidden inside smiles that looked complete from the outside. They had stood beside someone who offered certainty, while secretly remembering the one person who awakened something real. That person was you. Yet they were afraid of what that meant. They were afraid that choosing you would require honesty, courage, and the surrender of the life they had carefully arranged. So they kept moving. They accepted plans they were not emotionally ready to make. They nodded when families discussed dates, colors, ceremonies, photographs, and futures. They smiled when others expected them to smile. They answered questions with rehearsed confidence. And every time doubt rose in their chest, they called it fear of change. They told themselves that everyone becomes uncertain before a wedding. They believed the discomfort would disappear once the day arrived. But heaven knew that this was not ordinary hesitation. This was the soul resisting a path that did not belong to it. Stay till the end, because the confession that stopped the wedding was not spoken by the person you might expect. It was not a dramatic stranger entering at the last moment. It was not a loud interruption designed to embarrass anyone. It was quieter than that. More personal. More devastating. It came from someone who had watched your soulmate slowly disappear beneath the weight of expectations, someone who knew the difference between nervousness and heartbreak. The morning of the wedding began with beauty. Light entered the room softly. Clothes were prepared. Flowers were arranged. Phones kept ringing. People moved quickly, carrying boxes, fixing small details, laughing about memories, and speaking about how perfect everything looked. But your soulmate felt strangely distant from it all. The room was full, yet they felt alone. Everyone was preparing their appearance, but no one could see the battle beneath it. They looked into the mirror and did not recognize the person looking back. For a few seconds, they wondered how they had arrived there. Not physically, but emotionally. They remembered a different version of themselves, one who once believed love would feel like truth, not performance. They remembered conversations with you that had left them feeling seen. They remembered moments when nothing extraordinary happened, yet their soul felt peaceful. And then they looked at the wedding clothes, the carefully arranged surroundings, and the future waiting outside the door. That was when the first crack appeared. It was small. Invisible to everyone else. Your soulmate took a slow breath and tried to push the feeling away. They told themselves there was no turning back. Too many people had traveled. Too many plans had been made. Too much money had been spent. Too many expectations rested on their decision. They believed that disappointing everyone would be worse than disappointing themselves. But heaven was not going to let fear make the final choice. Pause here, because what happened next had been building for months. Someone close to your soulmate had noticed the changes. They had noticed how your soulmate became silent whenever your name was almost mentioned. They had seen the way certain songs made them distant. They had watched them stare at old messages, then close the screen quickly when footsteps approached. They had heard them say, "I am fine," too many times, in a voice that carried no peace. This person had remained quiet because they did not want to interfere. They respected the decision. They hoped the uncertainty would fade. They believed perhaps your soulmate would grow into the future they had chosen. But on the wedding morning, they saw something they could no longer ignore. They saw tears. Not tears of joy. Not tears of overwhelming happiness. These were the tears of someone saying goodbye to themselves. The person entered the room gently and closed the door. Outside, the celebration continued. Inside, time changed. Your soulmate wiped their face quickly, pretending it was nothing. They laughed nervously and blamed the emotion of the day. But the other person did not laugh. They simply asked, "Are you in love with the person waiting for you?" The question should have been easy. It was not. Your soulmate opened their mouth, but no answer came. The silence stretched longer than either of them expected. Music could be heard faintly outside. Footsteps passed beyond the door. Someone called their name from the hallway, but neither person moved. Then the question came again, softer this time. Are you in love with them, or are you trying to forget someone else? My child, that question entered the place your soulmate had kept locked for too long. It did not accuse them. It did not demand an explanation. It simply removed the last hiding place. And suddenly, your soulmate began to cry. Not because they hated the person they were supposed to marry. That is important for you to understand. This was not about cruelty. It was not about humiliating someone. It was about realizing that kindness without truth could still lead to heartbreak. They understood in that moment that continuing the wedding would not protect anyone. It would only postpone the pain and make it deeper. Still, they resisted. They said, "It is too late." The person beside them replied, "Too late for what?" Too late to tell the truth, or too late to keep living without it. Those words became the emotional confession that broke the illusion. But there was more. The person took your soulmate's hands and admitted something they had hidden. They confessed that they had known for a long time that your soulmate still loved you. They had seen it in every unfinished sentence. They had recognized it in the way your soulmate became defensive whenever anyone questioned the past. They confessed that they had once tried to convince your soulmate to move on because they believed you were gone forever. But watching them prepare to marry someone else had shown them the truth. Moving on is not the same as healing. And choosing someone safe is not the same as choosing someone true. Your soulmate whispered your name. It was the first time they had said it aloud in weeks. The sound of it changed the room. Do not skip this part, because the name did not leave their lips with anger. It left with grief, love, and a kind of surrender they had been avoiding. In that instant, the wedding day became a mirror. Every decision, every excuse, every compromise stood before them. They realized they were about to make a lifelong promise while a different truth was still alive inside their heart. But even then, they did not immediately leave. They stood between two worlds. On one side was the life already prepared for them. A room full of people. A partner waiting. Families expecting a celebration. A future that looked stable from the outside. On the other side was uncertainty, consequences, uncomfortable conversations, and the possibility that you might no longer want them. That final fear nearly kept them there. They asked the person beside them, "What if I walk away and the person I truly love no longer chooses me?" And the answer they received was the confession that finally moved them. The person said, "Then at least you will lose them honestly. But if you stay here, you will lose yourself dishonestly." Your soulmate became completely still. Heaven had been speaking to them through dreams, memories, restless nights, and repeated signs, but they had explained everything away. Now the message came through human words, spoken with compassion at the exact moment their soul could no longer avoid it. The room seemed to grow silent, even though the world outside was still moving. They looked again at their reflection. This time, they did not see someone ready to begin a marriage. They saw someone asking permission to be truthful. And the answer rose from within. They could not continue. The decision was not dramatic at first. There was no sudden announcement. No shouting. No grand movement. Your soulmate simply removed one item they had been wearing and placed it carefully on the table. Their hands trembled. The person beside them began to cry too, because both understood what that small action meant. A future had just changed. But the hardest moment was still ahead. Your soulmate knew they had to face the person waiting for them. They knew they had to walk through the hallway, past the flowers, past the family members, past the people who would not understand. They knew whispers would begin. Questions would follow. Some would accuse them of selfishness. Others would call them confused. A few would try to stop them before they could speak. Yet something inside them had become stronger than fear. For the first time in a long time, they were no longer running from what they felt. "My child, Heaven does not celebrate broken promises or wounded hearts. But heaven also does not ask a soul to build a sacred commitment upon a lie. Sometimes the most compassionate action looks painful at first. Sometimes truth arrives before a ceremony because the damage would be greater if it arrived after. Your soulmate stepped out of the room. The hallway felt longer than before. Every sound became sharper. The music. The voices. The movement of fabric. The opening and closing of doors. Someone smiled at them and said everything was ready. Your soulmate nodded, but their face had changed. A family member noticed and asked what was wrong. Your soulmate replied, "I need to speak to them alone." The words traveled quickly. Within moments, people began asking questions. Someone said there was no time. Someone else insisted the ceremony had to begin. Another person reminded them how many guests were waiting. Every voice carried pressure. Every sentence tried to return them to the role they were expected to play. But one voice inside them kept repeating the confession. If you stay, you will lose yourself dishonestly. They continued walking. The person they were meant to marry was waiting in another room, surrounded by hope, unaware that the entire future had shifted only minutes before. When your soulmate entered, the smile on that person's face disappeared. They could see the truth before hearing it. Your soulmate closed the door. For a moment, neither spoke. Then your soulmate said, "You deserve the truth before I make a promise I cannot fully keep." The words were painful, but gentle. They explained that the problem was not the other person's worth. They did not blame them. They did not compare them to you. They admitted that they had entered the relationship believing time would make them ready. They believed loyalty could grow where emotional truth was missing. They believed commitment would silence the unfinished part of their heart. But it had not. The person asked the question your soulmate feared most. Is there someone else? Your soulmate could have lied. They could have softened it with vague words. They could have said they simply needed time. But after everything that had happened, they understood that partial truth would only create more confusion. So they said, "There is someone I never truly stopped loving." The room changed. The person looked away, trying to understand the weight of the sentence. Tears came, not from rage, but from recognition. Perhaps they had felt the distance too. Perhaps they had noticed that some part of your soulmate was always elsewhere. Perhaps they had hoped marriage would bring them closer. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with all the truths both had avoided. Then something unexpected happened. The person did not shout. They asked, "Why did you wait until today?" Your soulmate answered, "Because I was afraid that telling the truth would make me the villain. I did not understand that continuing the lie would hurt you more." Those words were difficult to hear, but they carried respect. The person cried. Your soulmate cried. And for a few moments, they grieved not only the wedding, but the future everyone had imagined for them. Outside, people became restless. Inside, two people were choosing painful honesty over a peaceful illusion. Stay with me, because the next part is where the mystery deepens. After the conversation ended, your soulmate did not immediately come looking for you. Many would believe that walking away from the wedding meant they were ready to run straight into your arms. But that is not what happened. They were terrified. They had just dismantled a future. They knew there would be consequences. They knew people would talk. They knew the person they left behind would need space to heal. And beneath all of that was the deepest fear of all. What if you had already closed the door? Your soulmate left the building through a side entrance. Not because they were ashamed, but because they needed air. The sky seemed different. The sounds of the celebration faded behind them. They walked without direction, holding emotions they could not yet name. Relief. Grief. Guilt. Hope. Fear. And beneath them all, love. They sat alone for several minutes, unable to move. Their phone filled with messages. Calls came from family members. Friends asked what had happened. Some demanded explanations. Others expressed concern. But your soulmate ignored every notification. Then they opened an old conversation. Your conversation. The last messages between you were still there. They read slowly, as though seeing them for the first time. Words that once felt ordinary now carried meaning. A message where you had tried to explain your heart. A moment where you had asked for honesty. A final sentence that your soulmate had misunderstood because they were too defensive to listen. And then they found something that made them cover their mouth in shock. You had once told them, "I never needed you to be perfect. I only needed you to be honest." Those words were now standing beside the confession that had stopped the wedding. The connection was impossible to ignore. Your soulmate began to understand that this day had not started in the wedding room. It had started much earlier, perhaps the first time they chose fear instead of vulnerability with you. The wedding was only the final place where the hidden truth demanded to be seen. They wanted to contact you. Their finger hovered over your name. But they stopped. Not because they had changed their mind. Because they suddenly realized that they could not come to you only because another path had collapsed. They needed to approach you with truth, not desperation. They needed to take responsibility for the distance, the silence, and the choices that had hurt both of you. For the first time, they asked themselves not, "Will you take me back?" but, "Am I ready to become someone who can love you without running?" That question opened another door. My child, what heaven is revealing is not a simple story of someone leaving a wedding for romance. It is the awakening of a soul that had been living divided. The confession did not merely stop a ceremony. It forced your soulmate to see the cost of emotional avoidance. But there is something they still do not know. While they were sitting alone with your old messages open, another person was trying to reach them. Someone connected to you. Someone who had information they had never heard before. This person had learned what happened at the wedding, and they believed your soulmate needed to know the real reason you had once stepped away. Until that moment, your soulmate had believed a version of the past that was incomplete. They thought you had left because you stopped caring. They thought your silence meant indifference. They thought your distance was proof that the connection had meant more to them than it did to you. but the person trying to contact them knew otherwise. They knew about the night you almost reached out. They knew about the message you wrote and never sent. They knew about the sacrifice you made quietly, believing it would protect your soulmate from pressure. And they knew that if your soulmate discovered this truth, the emotional impact would be greater than anything that had already happened. The phone rang once. Your soulmate looked at the screen and did not recognize the number. They let it stop. A few seconds later, it rang again. This time, a message appeared. I know why you walked away from the wedding. But before you contact the person you still love, there is something about them you need to know. Your soulmate stared at the words. Their heart began to pound. The message continued. You were never told the whole story about why they left. Everything inside them became still. The wedding, the confession, the tears, the old conversation. Suddenly all of it seemed connected to a truth that had been hidden from them. They typed, "Who is this?" The reply came almost immediately. Someone who stayed silent too long. Your soulmate stood up. The air felt charged. The world around them seemed distant. They knew this was not a coincidence. The timing was too precise. The words touched the exact wound they had carried for so long. Then a final message arrived. I have the confession they wrote about you. They never believed you would see it. But after what happened today, you need to read every word. Your soulmate's hands began to tremble. Because attached beneath that message was a photograph of a folded letter. And written across the top, in handwriting they recognized instantly, were the words. If you ever learn the truth about why I walked away, please know that I never stopped loving you.